Hi guys, welcome to AS Learning. In our previous video, we have been discussing about the Linux operating system. In that, we have seen the Linux history and the design principles. So in this video, we are going to see about the rest of the topics. Okay. The kernel modules. So what do you mean by a module? A module is a particular section or a part. Okay, so a kernel module represents that a section of a kernel code that can be compiled, loaded, and unloaded independent of the rest of the kernel. So what do you mean by independent? So it doesn't need to dependent on any other module. So each and every module are independent and it can able to load it, compile and unload. And this kernel module may typically implement a device driver, a file system or a networking protocol. And this module has an interface that allows the third parties to write and distribute on their own terms, as well as it can distribute the device drivers or the file system that could not be distributed under the GPL. And this kernel module allows the Linux system to set up with the standard minimal kernel without any extra device drivers built in. And this kernel module has four components, namely the module management system, the module loader and unloader, the driver registration system, and the conflict resolution mechanism. Let us discuss about these components one by one in detail. The first one is the module management. The module management supports loading the modules into the memory and letting them talk to the rest of the kernel. So talk to the rest of the kernel means it could be able to communicate with the other kernel modules. So one module can able to communicate with the other kernel module. And this module loading has been split into two separate sections. Number one is managing section and number two is handling symbols. So what is this managing sections? So the managing sections of the module code in the kernel memory and the handling symbols that modules are allowed to make reference. Here we are having a module requester that manages the loading request but currently unloaded modules, and it also regularly queries the kernel to see whether a dynamically loaded module is still in use, and it will unload it when it is no longer actively needed. So the next component is the driver registration. So this driver registration, it allows the modules to tell the rest of the kernel that a new driver has been available. So how does it knows that a new driver has been made available? So a kernel maintains a dynamic table of all the known drivers installed in it and provides a set of routines to allow the drivers to be added or to be removed from the tables at any time. So whenever a new driver has been installed, it will be added into this dynamic table and it will inform all the other modules about the new driver. And this registration table contains the device drivers, the file systems, the network protocols and the binary format. So all this information will be stored in this dynamic table. The next component is the conflict resolution. So what do you mean by a conflict? So in case of any uncertainty, a conflict will occur. So this kernel module has a mechanism that allows different device drivers to reserve hardware resources and to protect those resources from accidental use by another driver. So which means that the same resources, when it has been tried to access by two drivers, then a conflict may occur. So when a same resource has been tried to access by two drivers, a conflict may occur. So a goal of this conflict resolution is to prevent the modules from clashing over access to the hardware resources. So what do you mean by a clash here? So whenever two device drivers wanted to access the same resources, then a clash may occur. Okay. And the second one is it prevents the auto probes from interfering with the existing device drivers. So the auto probe is just like accessing the same IO by both the drivers. Okay. And the third one, it resolves the conflicts with multiple drivers trying to access the same hardware. And the multiple drivers, when it tries to access the same hardware, then the following things may occur, and how this conflict resolution going to resolve these malfunctions. Number one, the kernel maintains a list of allocated hardware resource, and number two, the driver reserves resources with kernel database, and number three, reservation request rejected if the resource is not available. So the reservation request will be whenever a new driver is requesting for accessing a particular resource, and if that particular resource is already taken by another one driver, then the current request has to be rejected. The next topic is, we have seen the kernel modules, and now we are going to see about the process management. The process management. The Unix process management separates the creation of a processes and the running of the new program into two distinct operations. Number one is the fork system call, and number two is the exec system call. The fork system call creates a new process, whereas a new program is run after a call to exec, which means that whenever the exec system call has been active, then a new program is running. It tends the program to be in a running environment. So under Unix, a process encompasses all the information that the operating system must maintain to track the context of the single execution of a single program. Under Linux, the process properties falls into three categories. Number one, the process identity. Number two, the process environment. And number three, the process context. So let us see about these three categories a little bit in detail. The process identity. This process identity contains few parameters, the process ID. So this is a unique identifier for the process, and it is used to specify the process to the operating system when the application makes a system call either to signal, modify, or to wait for another process. And it also contains some credentials. Each process must have an associated user ID and one or more group IDs that determines the process rights to access the system resources and files. So it means it tells about the privileges. So it contains whether the read privilege or the write privilege. So those informations will be contained in these credentials. And number three is personality. So it is not traditionally found on Unix system, but under Linux, each process has an associated personality identifier that can slightly modify the semantics of certain system calls. And it is used primarily by emulation libraries to request that system calls be compatible with certain specific flavors of Unix. And the last one is the namespace. It is a specific view of the file system hierarchy. So what do you mean by hierarchy? A hierarchy is a layered structure. Okay. So most processes share the common namespace and operate on a shared file system hierarchy, but each can have unique file system hierarchy with its own root directory and a set of mounted file systems. Next, we can see about the process environment. So the process environment is inherited from its parent and is composed of two null terminated vectors. So the vectors are number one, the argument vector, and number two, the environment vector. So the argument vector lists the command line arguments used to invoke the running program, and it conventionally starts with the name of the program itself. Whereas the environment vector is a list of name and value pairs that associates named environment variables with arbitrary textual values. So the passing environment variables among processes and inheriting variables by a process children are flexible means of passing information to components of the user mode system software. These environment variable mechanisms provides a customization of the operating system that can be set on per process basis rather than being configured for the system as a whole. The next one is the process context. So what do you mean by process context? The state of the running program at any point in time is called as the context. So context switching, you know the context switching. So whenever a program wants to access the hardware, then the context switch takes place. The user mode will be switched to the kernel mode. Thus, the scheduling context is most important part of the process context. It is the information that the scheduler needs to suspend and restart the process. Here, the kernel maintains the accounting information about the resources which are currently being consumed by each and every process, and the total resources consumed by the process in its lifetime so far. And it maintains a file table. The file table is nothing but an array of pointers to kernel file structure. So in making file IO system calls, the processes refer to files by their index into this table using the file descriptor. Whereas the file table lists the existing open files, the file system context applies to the request to open new file. The current root and the default directories to be used for the new file searches are stored in this file system context. Here it also uses a signal handler table which defines the routine in the process address space to be called when the specific signals arrive. And it also has a virtual memory context. The virtual memory context of a process describes the full contents of the private address space. Next we can see about the process and the thread. So what do you mean by a thread? A single process may contain one or more threads. So which can be like, if you are having a process like this, if it is a process, then you can have one or more threads. So this can be called as a threads. So each and every process may have one or more threads. So Linux uses the same internal representations for the process and threads. A thread is simply a new process that happens to share the same address space as its parent. Both these process and threads together called as the task. The difference between the process and the thread is only made when a new thread is created by the clone system call. So apart from this fork system call, so the fork system call creates a new task with its own entirely new task context. But the clone system call creates a new task with its own identity, but that is allowed to share the data structures of its parent. Using this clone system call, it gives an application fine-grained control over exactly what is shared between two or more threads. So there are certain different flags that are used for this clone system call. Number one is clone underscore fs. So this is the file system information which is being shared. It represents the file system information which is being shared. And the next one is the clone VM. So it means that the same memory space is shared between two processes. And the third one, clone underscore sighand. So which means that signal handling. Okay, so which means that signal handling. So it represents the signal handlers that are being shared. And the last one is the clone files. It represents the set of open files that are being shared. So the process management has also been discussed, and the next topic to be covered is scheduling. Okay, so what do you mean by scheduling? So the scheduling, it is a job of allocating the CPU time to different tasks within an operating system. So while scheduling is normally thought as a running and interrupting of process, but it also includes the running of various kernel tasks. So running the kernel task consists of both tasks that are requested by the running process and the task that executes internally on behalf of the device driver. So as of version 2.5, the Linux version 2.5, a new scheduling algorithm has been proposed which uses preemptive and priority based. As a result of this, it produced a real-time range and a nice value and had challenges with interactive performance. So in order to overcome these difficulties, a version 2.6 has been introduced which uses the complete pair scheduling. So let us see what is this completely fair scheduling. It eliminates the traditional and common idea of time slice. What do you mean by time slice? Each and every process will be given a certain amount of time to utilize the processor. So this completely fair scheduler, it eliminates the traditional idea of using time slice. So instead of using the time slice, all tasks are being allocated with the portion of the processor's time. So now the completely fair scheduler calculates how long a process should run as a function of total number of tasks. So if n is considered as the runnable task, which means each of the process gets 1 by n of the processor's time. So here the weights each task with its nice value can be calculated as the smaller nice value leads to the higher weight. So if a process contains the smaller nice value, then it will be considered as the higher weight. It will be given the maximum priority. Next, we can see about the memory management. So what do you mean by memory management? So here, as far as the memory has been considered, there are two different types of memory, the physical memory as well as the logical memory. So the memory management, the Linux physical memory management system deals with allocating and freeing the pages or group of pages and small blocks of memory. So which means that allocating or deallocating the pages from the memory or to the memory. It has an additional mechanism for handling the virtual memory. So this memory management unit splits the memory into different zones due to the hardware characteristics. So this is an example for the x86 architecture. Here the memory management has been split into three different zones. Number one is zone underscore DMA, which has the physical memory size of less than 16 megabytes. And next one, zone normal. Here the size of the physical memory ranges from 16 to 896 MB, whereas the zone high mem, which has the higher size of the physical memory, which is greater than 896 megabytes. And the next, how to manage the physical memory. So here the page allocator allocates and frees all physical pages. It can allocate ranges of physically contiguous pages on request. What do you mean by contiguous pages? You have to store the pages in a sequence in a nearby location. So that is contiguous. Here the allocator uses a buddy heap algorithm to keep track of available physical pages, which can be done using the following steps. Each allocatable memory region is paired with the adjacent partner. So whenever two allocated partner regions are both freed up, then they are combined to form a larger region. So using the buddy heap algorithm, if this is a memory and you are having two different unused space, so these pages are being unused. So using this buddy heap algorithm, you can combine these two pages into a single unit. So this is called as the partner region. So whenever two allocated partner regions both are freed up, then they are combined together to form a larger region. Can you understand? If a small memory request cannot be satisfied by allocating an existing small free region, then a larger free region will be subdivided into two partners to satisfy the request. So what does it mean? If a small memory request cannot be satisfied by allocating the existing small free region, if a request has been received with a small memory size, then a larger region can be divided into two partners, and thus they can satisfy the request. Okay. And here the memory allocations in the Linux kernel occur either statically or dynamically. So what do you mean by statically? So here the drivers reserve a contiguous area of memory during the system boot time, whereas in the dynamic path it reserves the area via the page allocator. So what do you mean page allocator? So it is responsible for allocating the page in a memory. And here it also uses the slab allocator for kernel memory. In addition to that, it contains a page cache and a virtual memory system that also manages the physical memory. The page cache is kernel's main cache for the files, and it is also considered as the main mechanism for I/O to block devices, which means it is responsible for reserving the devices. The page cache stores the entire pages of the file contents for the local and network file I/O request. So this is the example for a buddy heap algorithm. So here the entire block of memory will be divided into two regions, two partner regions, and if there is a request with a small memory size, then this particular block will be further divided into two smaller regions, and then the request will be satisfied. And then it is a example for the slab allocator. So this is how the pages will be allocated to the memory using the contiguous mechanism. And the next one is the virtual memory concept. The virtual memory system maintains the address space visible to each process. It creates the pages of the virtual memory on demand. So whenever needed, it will be creating the virtual pages. It creates the pages of virtual memory on demand and manages the loading of those pages from the disk or their swapping back out of the disk whenever required. So this virtual memory manager maintains two separate views of the process address space. A logical view that describes the instructions concerning the layout of the address space. Okay, which means the address space consists of a set of non-overlapping regions, each representing a continuous page-aligned subset of the address space. And the second one is the physical view. The physical view of each address space, which is stored in the hardware page tables for the process. And this virtual memory regions can be categorized by number 1, the backing store, which describes from where the pages for the region comes, and the regions are usually backed by the file or by nothing. So that is called as the demand zero memory. And the second category is the region's reaction to the write operation. And next, the kernel creates a new virtual address space based on when a process runs a new program with the exec system call, or upon creation of the new process by the fork system call. On executing a new program, the process is given a new completely empty virtual address space, and the program loading routines populate the address space with virtual memory regions. So creating a new process with the fork system call involves creating a complete copy of the existing process virtual address space. So which may include the following steps. First, the kernel copies the parent's process VMA and then creates a new set of page tables for the child, and then the parent's page table are copied directly into the child's with the reference count of each page covered being incremental. So after the fork, the parent and child share the same physical pages of memory in their address spaces. So now we can see about the swapping and paging. So what do you mean by swapping? So whenever a new page has been demanded, it is the role of the operating system to bring that particular page from the disk into your memory. The virtual memory paging system reallocates the pages of the memory from physical memory out to the disk when the memory is needed for something else. This virtual memory paging system can be divided into two sections. Number 1, the page out policy algorithm, and number 2, the paging mechanism. So this page out policy algorithm decides which pages has to be write out of the disk and when it has to be done. And the second one, the paging mechanism, it actually carries out the transfer the page's data back into the physical memory whenever it has been needed. In addition to this, a bitmap is used to track used blocks in swap space which is kept in the physical memory, whereas the allocator uses the next fit algorithm to try to write contiguous runs. Next is the kernel's virtual memory. The Linux kernel reserves a constant architecture dependent region of the virtual address space of every process for its own internal use. This kernel virtual memory area contains two regions, a static area. So what is the static area? So it contains the page table references to every available physical page of the memory in the system, so that there is a simple translation from the physical to the virtual addresses when running the kernel code. The remainder of the reserved section is not reserved for any specific purpose. Its page table entries can be modified to point to any other areas of the memory. So the next one is static and dynamic linking. So a program whose necessary library functions are embedded directly in a program's executable binary file and it is statically linked to its libraries. Having a statically linked libraries is that every program generated must contain a copies of exactly the same common system library functions. So in order to overcome this, a dynamic linking concept has been used. It is more efficient in terms of both physical memory and the disk space usage, because it loads the system libraries into the memory only once. Unlike the static library, every time when a program has been executed, it will keep on loading the system libraries into the memory. But in case of dynamic linking, so those libraries are loaded only once. Here, the Linux implements dynamic linking in user mode through the special linker library. So it can be done through the following steps. Number one, here every dynamically linked program contains a small statically linked function that has been called when the process starts. Then it maps the linked library into the memory, and then the linked library determines the dynamic libraries that are required by the process and names of the variables and functions that are needed. Then it maps the libraries into the middle of the virtual memory and resolves the references to symbols that are contained in the libraries. And then the shared libraries compile to be a position independent code, so it can be loaded anywhere. So far we have discussed about the Linux history, the design principles, the kernel modules, the process management, the scheduling part, and the memory management. So we can see the rest of the topics in our next video. Thank you.